and welcome back to PhatPhish Guitar Studio. I'm Dave, and in this video I want to talk a bit about how you can sort of transition from learning scales just as scales, as building blocks for music, to actually using them to play melodies and play lead lines. Because this is something that comes up a lot, I guess because quite a bit of the teaching that I do tends to be quite theory orientated, and also I guess because of PhatPhish, there's this tool that I provide where you can see a guitar fingerboard and all the different scales and the notes that are within them. But people often say, well, having learned a scale, what can I do with it to actually enable me to play music? Because just playing a scale, it's not going to have any wrong notes in it because you're playing notes from the scale, but it's not going to sound inspiring, it's not going to sound musical. So you need to think about how you can just treat the scale as a set of building blocks and then exploit those notes to come up with actual melody lines. There's two sort of aspects to this. First is kind of how the melody itself is constructed as you transition from one note to another, and the other is kind of how that melody line sits against an underlying chord progression. This video I'm going to kind of focus more on the former, the idea of how the melody line's constructed. And the key to this really is thinking about intervals. So intervals are basically, an interval is the distance between two notes. So if you think about, say, let's say a major scale, we've got some notes in there, and just playing that in series, it sounds like a major scale, but what you're actually hearing is a series of intervals as we move from one note to another. So from the C up to the D, that's an interval of two semitones, two frets. Yeah, that's what an interval called a whole tone. The interval from the D to the E, also a whole tone, two semitones. The interval from the E to the F is an interval of one semitone, one fret. And as you can hear, the distance between the C and the D and the distance between the D and the E, they have a similar sound. One's slightly higher than the other, but the kind of the feel of that interval is different compared to the interval between the E and the F, because that's only one semitone. A two semitone interval or one semitone. Yeah, it's a different sound to it. And that's kind of the key thing to playing melody lines, is as you're moving from one note to another, how does that melody line feel like it's moving? So there's a really simple example there, just using intervals from the scale, two semitones or one semitone. But obviously there's bigger intervals in there. The interval from C to E, that's four semitones. That's what we call a major third, from the root, the third degree of the scale. And there's an interval of five semitones, or a perfect fourth, between the root and the fourth degree. 7 semitones between the root and the fifth, and an interval of 9 semitones between the root and the sixth degree. An interval of 11 semitones between the root and the 7th degree, and an interval of an octave between the root and the next root up. And each of those intervals has its own distinctive sound. So it's a useful thing to do, to be able to recognise the sound of those intervals, because if you hear a piece of music and you want to transcribe it, being able to hear a note and then the next note and think, well, the transition between that, it's very resolved, or it's slightly resolved, or how that interval feels. It'll enable you to kind of pick out the notes from a melody that you're hearing. But really here I want to talk about how you exploit that is for playing lead lines. So what I'd advise you to do is to spend a bit of time just with scales, major scales and minor scales, and listening to the intervals between the root and each interval in the scale. So that'll give you the full gamut of intervals available to you. And then you think about, well, if you're on one note on the scale and you want to move up to another note in the scale, how do you want that transition to sound? Do you want it to sound really gradual? Is it going to be like something you can go by by 1 semitone, or do you want to go by 2 semitones, or do you want to go by 4 semitones, or whatever. As long as you're going from a note that's in the scale to a note that's in the scale, you're not going to go wrong. But you need to think about how that melody line progresses. So if I'm going up from, say, like a C to an E, as part of a melody line, it sounds much different. It sounds different if I was going from C to an F. So say I wanted a melody line where I want to go from a start on C and finish on a G. If I want to play some notes in between to give that some flow, I could go from a C to an E to the G, or C to the F to the G, or maybe it's a C to a D to a G. So the starting note, the finishing note are the same, but the notes in between are different. And the feel, the way the melody line flows is different. So it's a really simple example, but just kind of get you set onto that idea of thinking about how you move from one note to another. You're moving by an interval. Be familiar with the way those intervals sound, and you can start to kind of give some more thought to your melody line. So rather than just picking notes at random from a scale, thinking about how you want it to feel. Now, the note that you start on, the note that you finish on are quite important, particularly with the way that they kind of mesh with the underlying chord progression. Talk about that in another video. But really, this is just thinking about how you arrange the notes. So ear training is really useful to be able to recognise intervals. So it's worth spending some time with your guitar or any instrument and just listening to the sound of those intervals moving from one note to another. There's no substitute for the creative process. You've still got to take that knowledge and exploit it in some sort of creative way. But this can help you get out of just, oh, I know a scale and I've spent some time playing scales through to get my fingers used to the way that they feel, and I've got the muscle memory and the motor skills necessary to play the scale. But you need to move beyond just playing the scale. You need to take notes from it and use them in a musical way. And thinking about intervals is a really useful way to do that. Probably repeating myself a bit, but it's because it's important. Okay, just a kind of a quick one there, but hopefully plenty of stuff for you to get away and practice with in your own time and make that transition from just using scales as scales and actually using them in a musical context. Okay, that's all for now. If you enjoyed the video, found it useful, please click like down there. If you really enjoyed it, you want to see other videos that I post onto the channel, then please click subscribe, also down there. If you've got a question, whether it's about music theory, guitar playing, guitar equipment, anything like that, you're welcome to leave a comment below. But if it's a specific question you want me to cover in a video, you'd probably be better off going here, fill that form in. I'm guaranteed to see it. I don't always see comments on YouTube videos, but I do see questions that are sent in through that link. Okay, that's all for now. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in another video next time. Bye for now.